Fantasy Baseball today. That is us. Eric Mack, that's him, Orestes Destrade.
Yes.
Welcome back. Brought to you by Captain Morgan. We're not going to talk as much Detroit as you guys did last week. I heard it was a little bit intense. We're going to talk about Max Scherzer, though, and his game yesterday. Recorded 14 of 17 by strikeouts. Pretty good.
I was just so pleased to see that. It's a good call-up. Obviously, they've been having the problems with Dontrell Willis. They were, hoping to use Armando Galarraga, but he, was used earlier in the weekend in relief. So, here comes Scherzer. And I've always been high on this kid. Obviously, he's never really kind of, really tweaked it in right. He hasn't had that many great starts. He's only had about 9 starts, under his belt. But what movement on his pitches. Yeah. And he's the type of kid that, you maybe want him to make a little move, slyly make a trade for. If you don't have him, he's out there. Or if you do have him, starting him, because I think he's a high-end guy that can get you a lot of strikeouts. You may not win the game, but you're going to get a lot of points with the strikeouts. Yeah. His ball moves too dramatic, and everybody has trouble hitting him.
They sent him down to work on his mechanics, and obviously the results are exactly what they wanted to see when he came back. Max Scherzer's got some knockout stuff. I added him in so many leagues. You got to pick him up. It's probably too late if you weren't watching in the middle of the game. So many people jumped off the bandwagon when he was sent down. We said, don't worry about it. He's going to be back, and he's going to be an impact pitcher for the Tigers and fantasy owners, and he's back. He is a top 25 fantasy starter, maybe even a top 10 if he can get a little deeper into games. But with that strikeout rate, it's very difficult to go very deep.
And offensively, the Tigers, seem to be putting it together. Obviously, we're seeing what Miguel Cabrera is doing. Brandon Inge has been tweaked a little bit offensively, and he's standing up a little bit more upright. So he's starting to hit the ball a little better. So this team that might start putting some runs together. You start doing that with that kid's arm, and you may get wins and strikeouts.
Yeah. What about Willis? Does he land on his feet somewhere? What do you make of him as
I think
a
a team will pick him up. They're just going to wait for the designated for assignment clause to run out so they don't have to pay that huge contract. But he'll get a minimum deal somewhere, land, maybe start out as a long reliever, a lefty out of the bullpen, and then elevate back to the rotation spot. But wherever he lands up, it's going to have to be a really good situation for him to have any value in mixed leagues. So if you own him in mixed leagues, just cut him. AL only, maybe hold on to him. You're not sure that he's going to land with the AL team. I'm tending to think he'll land with an NL team.
Could Wednesday be the day, guys, for Carlos Zambrano back in the rotation?
It is absolutely the day, and we finally get him back in the rotation. I was hoping it would be a little more early in the week so we can get him as a 2-star pitcher in Fantasy Week 9. But he's returning against the Pirates, and that's a decent matchup for him. Even if he doesn't go deep into the game because his pitch count can't go over 100 pitches, Zambrano's still a decent start in Fantasy Week 9. They've moved Tom Scorzalani back to the bullpen. They're going to start Randy Wells Monday on short rest because Randy Wells didn't record an out in his last start. Wells will be fine. I think he's a decent start as a 2-star pitcher in Week 9. Scorzalani, if you have him in NL only, hold him because he could elevate back to the rotation. There's always a way to find spots for decent pitching.
And I got to sneak in because you mentioned Zambrano. One of the reasons that Carlos Silva, 7-0 Carlos Silva, has been so happy and comfortable with Chicago is because Carlos Zambrano, because they're very, very good buddies from Venezuela. And when I watched him win the other day with his 11 punch-outs, career high 11 punch-outs,
I can't understand it.
It was but really what I was watching was Carlos Zambrano from like 2 or 3 years ago. They're built very similar, big, heavy, burly guys, heavy sinker, heavy slider, good fastball that they spot. It was Zambrano 2 or 3 years ago. It really was. And that's who they need to get. They need both those guys, and they'll make a run in that division. And
fantasy owners need CC Sabathia. Orestes Destrade.
Wow.
We need to talk about him because notoriously a slow starter. You're thinking he should have been hot by now. When will he get hot? Will he get hot? All of those questions.
He should have been Shehadi already by now, but he not hottie right now. I'm telling you that much. But again, he's one of those guys that you don't know because he's such, he's an elite athlete. He's beyond just being a great baseball pitcher and a great baseball player. This guy is an elite athlete. I've been around him a lot, and I think he will come around. And I really think that June is going to be a big month for him. He's notoriously has great months in June, July. In fact, August is really his best month. So I really do that this year is starting to get churning with the warmer months. Has been a little delayed, and we've been having some inclement, weird weather all over the nation. And I think maybe in his head he's not just right there, but he's missing with his slider. and he's missing with his fastballs. When he gets in that trouble, he's behind, he gets hit.
In fantasy terms, if someone's selling, buy.
Bye.
Take it from him.
Especially a guy like
Take
that.
candy from
We
a
need
baby.
good stats from him. We need our stats from Al Melchior. He is our stats guru, and he is talking about how defensive outfielders help pitchers a whole lot. Listen up.
Professor.
Let's talk about something this week that normally doesn't have much to do with fantasy, and that's defense. If a player's on a really good, hot defensive streak, we say, well, that's great, but unless it carries over to his at-bats, who really cares in fantasy? But maybe it's time to rethink defense in fantasy. And what we're going to focus on this week is outfield defense. Sometime later in the season, we'll take a look at the infielders. But what I've done for now is I've taken 7 teams from the major leagues, 4 of which have very, very good outfield defenses, at least so far this season. The Giants, the Mets, the Cubs, and the Mariners. And then I've also selected out 2 teams who have 2 of the worst outfield defenses, and that's the Red Sox and the Braves. And then I've also thrown the Twins in here for good measure, and I'll explain why in just a minute. So what we're measuring here on this particular graph is the batting average on balls in play when the ball is a fly ball. So these are the fly balls that aren't home runs, the ones that stay in the park. And you see that there's a range of values here for the pitchers on the graph. Each dot represents a different pitcher on these teams. So over on the left side of the graph are pitchers who have given up very, very few hits on fly balls in play. Over here are pitchers who have given up much higher than the average share of fly ball base hits. And notice that it really breaks down by team. So if we look here in the first 4 rows of the graph, we've got the 4 teams that I mentioned have really good outfield defenses. And notice that, particularly with the Cubs, the Mets, and the Giants, there are virtually no pitchers who give up a lot of fly ball base hits. Just, in fact, a couple of dots here represented. But if you look way on the left, we've got pitchers like Ted Lilly for the Cubs, who also gives up a lot of fly balls, period. We've got Jason Vargas for the Mariners. We've got Jonathan Sanchez for the Giants. None of them are giving up very many fly ball hits, even though all give up a lot of fly balls. So if you look at their performances and you think they're a little fluky and it's too good to last, maybe it's not too good to last. Maybe they're just getting a lot of help from their outfield, and that help could last all season long. Now, on the other hand, let's look at a few other teams here. Towards the bottom, we've got the Braves, we've got the Red Sox, and we've got the Twins. As I mentioned before, the Braves and the Red Sox don't have very good outfield defenses, or at least they haven't so far this year. And we have the opposite pattern, where nearly every pitcher is giving up lots of fly ball hits, again, excluding home runs, lots of fly ball hits, even, or in particularly in the cases where you have pitchers that give up lots of fly balls, like, for example, Tim Wakefield for the Red Sox, or for the Braves, Tommy Hanson. So they're getting maybe a little bit hurt by their outfield defense. Now, finally, at the bottom, we have the Twins, who model a lot like these other teams, but the Twins actually have a pretty decent outfield defense. Denard Span's done really well, in particular in center. Delman Young's had a good defensive season, and yet all these pitchers, except for, this is Carl Pavano over here, all of them are giving up lots of fly ball hits. So does that disprove that there's a connection between defense and a pitcher's performance? Not necessarily, because there's an awful lot of dots on both sides of the ledger here that give you a fairly large sample size to show that overall there seems to be a relationship here, but the Twins remind us that that might not be the case for every team.
That was Al Melchior reporting, and you and I were talking before the video, and we were looking at that. We were saying, you said Boston's a great example of that. Their outfield, not what it was going into the season.
Not at all, and I think that's a great point that the professor is making here, as far as looking at those, those outfield. I mean, those balls that don't go, go over the fence, but in the fly ball. The outfield for the Bo Sox at the beginning of the season, Cameron, former Gold Glover, Ellsbury, a Gold Glover, Drew, a phenomenal right fielder, but 2 of those guys were down, so you had to go with McDonald, you had to go with Armedia, both new to Fenway. Yeah. So the ballparks and all of that to come into play with what he's talking about.
And Boston made a huge move to upgrade their defense, and they wanted to do it with Cameron in center because Ellsbury had one of the worst rates of fly ball defensive range factor, and they wanted to move Ellsbury to left, but they're going to go back and put Ellsbury in center. Ellsbury's a speedier guy. He's a younger guy. He's going to cover more ground. Cameron's going to be in left. It's going to be new for Cameron playing the Green Monster and playing in left, but I think that Red Sox outfield in general is going to be better with the health of those guys. I know Ellsbury's back on the DL, but we should get him back in a couple weeks. He's going to let those ribs, those fractured ribs, heal a couple more weeks. Cameron is back, and when that outfield is full strength, you're going to get good results out of that Red Sox pitching staff, which you haven't gotten yet. You can look on what Al's charts show. Yes, a lot of fly balls landed in. That's going to stop in guys like Beckett, guys like Dice-K. Lester's been good of late. Buchholz has been good of late. These guys, and Lackey, these guys are going to be much better in the second half with better outfield defense. It's a big way to stop runs from scoring. It was in Moneyball. Fix the outfield defense, particularly in center, and I think Ellsbury is going to do that.
All right, good results. That's what you want to hear. 2 start pitchers, you want to hear about them. Nick Blackburn on this list. These are advisable pitchers.
Right. Yeah, Nick Blackburn.
And we've got graphics for days. Look at that. We're so high-tech.
Yeah, Nick Blackburn is a little bit of a surprise. He's owned in only 41% of leagues and only starting in 27%. And then you look at his matchups, they're really good. Nick Blackburn, to me, is one of the best sleepers on that 2-star pitchers list. If it's not too late to get him in your lineup, pick him up and get him in. I think he's a must-start.
What about risky starting pitchers? Javier Vazquez on this list.
Yeah, Vazquez, I really can't trust him. He had another 5 earned runs. However, you look at that list, the starts with Baltimore, that's a good matchup, and then Toronto. I think you could start him in deeper leagues, but if you have alternatives, go away from him. Rich Harden, another guy, if you have alternatives, don't use him. Joe Blanton, if you have alternatives, don't use him. He's been struggling. Ricky Nolasco is a shell of himself. I don't really understand it. I wouldn't start him, and like I said with Randy Wells, coming off that start where he didn't record an out, I would probably start Randy Wells in deeper leagues still.
All right, time to talk buy or sell a couple of rookies, and we're starting with Sam LeCure.
Yeah.
Made his debut, and you said, Lauren, it wasn't terrible.
Well, it wasn't a bad debut, and he can fill the void for now in the Reds rotation, but it's going to be probably his rotation spot that goes to Aroldis Chapman sometime in June. Chapman has some more things to work on, particularly with his command and getting deeper into games. That should be expected with a young lefty. Lefties tend to mature a little later, but Chapman's going to be up in June. LeCure is going to be back down, but you can use him in a spot-start, stopgap form right now in deeper leagues.
What about Carlos Monasterios? Only went 5 innings, Mac.
Right. In his first start, he went 5 innings. Actually, it was his second start. First time he reached 5 innings, got his first victory. He is back in the Dodgers rotation this week. They were going to bring Charlie Hager off the DL and use him in their rotation, but Hager had a setback. Monasterios stays, and he's going to start Wednesday. That makes John Eli a 2-star pitcher in Fantasy Week 9. The thing you have to worry about with Monasterios, the Rule 5 pick and rookie, he probably will go back to the bullpen because Vicente Padilla is starting a rehab assignment in Fantasy Week 9. He might not need but 1 or 2 rehab outings to be back in the rotation. So Monasterios, yeah, you can buy in deeper leagues, NL only. He could be effective as a long reliever, but he's probably back in the bullpen once Padilla's ready.
I have questions for a fantasy owner. Number 1, I have 2 questions. Have you set your lineup? Have you set your lineup, by the way?
You better hurry
up. And number 2, have you sent us your
questions?
You got to hurry up and meet us on the other side.